maybe even 2 years ago, I decided to do an experiment, and I just really didn't have enough things to finish this experiment out. But what I'm doing is trying to see which method is the best for whitening out black lines, especially really dark ones in a coloring book. Since I started this, I don't care as much, but there are times when I would prefer that the lines not be there, so you get more of a painterly look instead of coloring book. So what I started with was what I had, and I had some acrylic pens, which I realize now that I didn't do the middle of this, so I'll come back and do acrylic pen. This feels very smooth. Then I used a jelly roll, which I had, and I can feel a little bit of the jelly roll on here. And jelly roll, the white pens, well, probably all of them are water-soluble paint anyway. They may even be an acrylic paint, so it's going to have a very similar sort of thing, I think, to this. Then I had some white gouache, and I painted over everything with the white gouache, and I could feel the texture. Since I did this, I do know that coloring over gouache is not the easiest, so that may end up making this a little bit difficult. I also used a white pencil, and I'm not sure if I used the Prisma white pencil or the white in the Derwent drawing set. Probably the white in the Derwent drawing, and we'll see how well that works. You can still see the black lines, but the idea is not necessarily to obliterate them, because I do need to be able to color in the shape. So then yesterday I filled out some more, and I have tempera paint sticks still for like new since I started this, and my light is going a little blinky. But I colored over the entire thing with tempera paint sticks. I cannot feel that on here at all. It doesn't feel any different than the paper. I also recently purchased some gesso, and I had no idea that it feels sandy, so I like that. It definitely gives a texture still. It's not quite the same color as the paper, so you could tell where I went over it a little bit. Okay, like, quit being so blinky and weird. And then I decided to try some white watercolor, and I did not have actual white. I only had like this antique white, so it has given it a yellowish tone, which will ultimately affect the colors that you can see through this. So I'm going to try some different pencils on different parts of this so that I can kind of tell what pencils I would prefer to use for this kind of work. And then I used watercolor ground over this, which is not white. It is obscuring the lines a little bit, and it does have a lot of texture. Oh, this just has a regular watercolor texture, so it is a little rougher, and it did warp the paper quite a bit. Watercolor ground is flat, so this is the only one that has warped the paper any. Usually when I do watercolor and I color over it, it kind of goes away. This is in the Circle of Life book by Mel Pimeni. I never know how to say her last name. And it takes actually wet media pretty well. Like, I've colored here and it didn't come over, so this is all watercolor. The entire thing is basically watercolor with colored pencils over the top of it. And this was all Inktense for the base layer of this, and colored pencil over the top of it. I suppose I could have tried the white Inktense pencil, and maybe I can mix some things up a little bit. But, you know, even though this is double-sided, the wet media doesn't seem to come to the paper, through the paper very much. Now, I haven't actually colored a whole lot in here, but I'm very interested in seeing how this experiment plays out, and I will come back after I've done some coloring on it. I did leave black lines in here so I could have some comparison that way. I'm gonna spend some time coloring, and I'll be back. Okay, Derwent colors that I decided to use for the flower are the Derwent Drawing Terracotta and the Chinese White, and then the Derwent Light Fast, Derwent Red, Forest, and Scarlet. And I started with the comparison for white pencil and gouache because they're next to each other here. The white pencil did lighten up the Derwent red to make it a much more pinkish color. And I just realized I didn't color over that line there. And the lines are less noticeable, I'd say, than they were before, but I had to bring in a much darker color if I wanted to do any kind of shading in that area so that that didn't get lightened up to too much. So it was smooth. I was still able to put these colors over the top of it, and I could still add some highlights and stuff, but these pencils are really good for any kind of layering that I want to do, because there's a lot of color on the paper right now, but I'm still able to get more color down onto the paper, even with the lines being covered up with the white pencil. Next to it, I have the gouache, and the gouache is very rough, and so I'm having a hard time getting complete coverage. And I did notice that details are hard to do. Now, the white lines are completely covered, which means that if I do want a line in there, I have to guess where it is because I can't really see them all that well. And I can put many, many layers on here with that white gouache because the lines are completely covered up. And that means that it's kind of easier to do things with the highlights. It's a much smoother overall finish, but it does take a lot of pencil to cover up all of the little spots there. And I could try using a blender pencil over the top of it. I have several I could try to see which ones would be the best for doing something like that, but you can see that there's no lines on there, and this does look very smooth and uninterrupted with any kind of lines. But I have to keep adding pencil because I just notice spots that I don't like where I can see the white through there. And then it is hard to get crisp lines because it is so rough where the gouache is. So that's the first two. Okay, I've now finished the jelly roll and acrylic pen with the same Derwent colors, and the jelly roll is better than the acrylic pen. The acrylic pen, it built up too many, it was just, I couldn't layer, and you can actually see some of the paint lines through here where the color just did not want to stay on that acrylic paint. So I would definitely call this one a fail for using the Derwent over the acrylic pen for lines for sure. Jelly roll didn't have the same problem. There are a few places where I can still see the lines through it because the jelly roll tended to skip a lot and not, I may have used too thin of a one or something, but it did better, I would say, than the acrylic pen. So not what really, this is okay. This one I definitely would not want to use again for the Derwent. Next up we have the Derwent on watercolor ground and antique white watercolor. And I gotta say, I was super surprised by the antique white watercolor. I think it did an excellent job of covering up those lines. It made a semi-textured surface for the colored pencil to hold on to. And I was able to get quite a few layers on here. I think if I practiced a little bit with the application, that it would work really well for the colored pencils. The watercolor ground, I think if I were doing something where I put the watercolor ground on the paper and then watercolored and then was using the pencils over the top for some shading and highlighting and that kind of thing, I think that it would work well. It did kind of cover up the lines a little bit, but it's going to be interesting to see how much using the pencils on just the regular paper does for covering up any kind of line work that's already here. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for just using it to cover up lines, but I do want to do some more experimenting with at least the Derwent and combining that with some watercolor. All right, the last pairing was the gesso and the tempera paint stick. I used a kwik stick on there. The kwik stick is white and it did brighten everything up. I can't layer quite as much as I'd like to with it, and it doesn't completely cover the lines, but they are obscured. I've been using occasionally a cheap colorless blender from Color, and yeah, I can't really blend on here. It's very, very slick. The gesso is the complete opposite. It's very, very rough. And so I had a hard time getting a straight line on it and getting the colors to blend until I actually did use the colorless blender on here. And I think that helped push the color into the rough surface. I may want to investigate diluting this a little bit. The other thing that was a problem is that this red has spread on here. I haven't tried to erase it to see if I'm able to do anything like that. It looks like I can erase the red, the powder that's just spread around on there. So that may not end up being a problem. I don't know what effect the eraser is going to have on the surface because this is a very, very rough surface. The blending is really nice. For Derwent pencils, I would say the best is, like, the overall effect is best with gesso and second best with the gouache. The worst is a tie between, no, the acrylic pen is absolutely the worst. I was going to say it was a tie between it and the watercolor ground, but no, this is absolutely horrible. The acrylic pen was terrible. So I'm going to pick out some colors for another set of pencils. I'll be back soon. All right, so I decided to do leaves up at the top with the Faber-Castell Polychromos, and I'm using the color Caput Mortem number 169, Ivory number 103, Permanent Green Olive 167, and Earth Green Yellowish number 168. So I'm using these 4 pencils to do all of the leaves. I did do already the leaves that have nothing on them, that they're just the bare paper, and you can see that the Polychromos make a very nice color on here. I've also started on these leaves, and I thought I would throw in how I am coloring the leaves and how I would normally do it. So normally I would start with the main color of the leaf, which I'm using the Permanent Green Olive for, and I will put a layer on here because these are very much layering pencils, and I will have it the color more intense where I want it to be more intense, and then much, much lighter where I'm going to add highlights. And anywhere I'm going to put in a shadow, I also have a little bit extra layer of that green. In the next series, I will show you the second layer because this is going to be a 3-layer sort of coloring thing for each of those leaves. Then we're back to using the white pencil as the way to cover up the white lines, or the black lines. And again, this kind of softens and brightens all of the colors in there. I really wanted to have those lines be a lighter green color because in leaves they really usually are a lighter green color. That was just not possible. So I struggled a little bit with that. I also struggled with getting any kind of shading the way I wanted it, and I wasn't able to put a whole lot of layers on here because there was already a significant amount of white pencil on the page. So I just didn't get the kind of coverage and the layering that I usually like to have when I want to color with polychromos. And so I had to change tactic a little bit and just have the highlights. So for the main part of the leaf, I am using this color, and then for anything where the leaf has turned over, I'm using the earth green yellowish. For highlights, I'm using the ivory, and then to create the shadows, I'm using the caput mortuum. On the gouache, I was able to get the white colored veins that I wanted, but otherwise I did not like using it. It's very rough, and so I would need to have a smoother application. It doesn't feel initially like it's all that rough, but when you start coloring on it, it is. It's very rough. And so again, I had trouble with crisp lines on here, and with this particular leaf, I've had a lot of trouble with getting it to shade properly. I do have a lot of room to add colors in here because it is rough, but it's not evenly rough, and so it gives it a very textured thing that I can't smooth out in any way, and so it's not very realistic like that. But I can get those veins in there with the light color like I was hoping for. So I'm hoping that one of the other ways of finishing the lines will help me with that. I would say probably gouache is not good for detail with covering detailed areas. It did work okay. It's one of my more favorite with the Derwent drawing on the Derwent products, not just drawing, but Derwent Lightfast on the flower. But with these pencils, I did not like it for the details on the leaves. I suppose it's okay in some of the areas where I just went ahead and forgot about the details, but it is really hard for me to get those crisper lines, like where the leaf has folded over. So not probably something I would recommend for using these pencils with and doing details. The next two areas are jelly roll and acrylic pen. And the polychromos did not work well with either of these. Here you can see that the jelly roll, the pencil just basically did not write over it for the most part, and it ended up very shiny, and I was unable to do much layering and blending because of the interruption of the jelly roll. The acrylic pen was worse as far as the polychromos being able to color over it. You can see it's very light colored, so that might work well if you need to have something really highlighted to stick out. But again, the pencil just did not blend very well in the spaces that it had available. Going back to the polychromos working just on the paper by itself, here I had just used the darkest green as a base layer, making it heavier shaded in areas where I was going to want it to be darker colored, and lighter shaded areas in areas that are going to be highlighted. Here I had added my shadow color, which I was using the caput mortuum, and my highlighted areas where I was using ivory, and I also had done some of the little leaves that were just going to be light green, and the back sides of the leaves in the lighter green color. And then this has all of the different layers already added into it. So another layer of the green over the top, to blend in all of the shaded and highlighted areas. So the pencils do work really nice on just the paper by itself. They do not work well over either the acrylic pen or the jelly roll. Okay, so now we have the polychromos on the watercolor ground, and again, it's about the same as the Derwent pencils. It's a rough surface. It doesn't cover very well, but it might work out with watercolor underneath it and just using this for some highlights. I don't know. I may try that out in some of the other areas where I put some coverage of the watercolor ground, or maybe in another book. I don't know. Then the antique white. It's a little bit rough. It doesn't make a nice smooth thing, but I may be able to work that out with a whole bunch more layers. It is shiny, and I had a hard time seeing things with my light. I can see it a little bit better now that I've moved it further away from me for recording. I was able to get the ivory to stand out on the lines by just, covering over this, and you can't really see the black line underneath it that well, and the shading was a little rough. If I work at this harder, it kind of pushes the paper in and is covering up even the stuff that I had put down from before. So I'm not sure that this is a really good way for covering if you're going to use polychromos either. And so far, I haven't really liked using the polychromos in any of these test areas, so they may just not be a good pencil for this. We're now looking at the last two sections, the gesso and the tempera paint stick with the Prismacolors. Not Prisma, I'm sorry, with the polychromos. I had the same kind of problems with these, with keeping a hard line as I did with the Derwent. And it brightens the colors a lot. And you have to put many, many layers or you're going to see a lot of the white through it. I was able to completely cover the lines, but you are sacrificing the crispness of the edges. With the tempera paint stick, the lines are reduced, and it's very difficult to put layers over the top of the paint. The layers look a little streaky, and they're very shiny. I was able to do it, but it doesn't give the best results. The next section, or the next pencils actually, are Prismacolors, and I decided to color the cranes or blue herons, I'm not really sure what they are, kind of made them into blue herons, using Prismacolor. And I'm using 20% warm gray, which is PC 1051, 70% cool gray, which the numbers kind of come off of here. 70% cool gray is 1065, and then cloud blue, which is 1023, and periwinkle, which is 1025. It works okay over the white pencil. Prismacolors are really hard to get details in my opinion. They look great here on the plain paper for making very smooth and dark blends because they literally just smush into each other. And that makes them really difficult to use for a lot of detail type work because they do just smush into each other. They kind of just blend by the smushing. It's honestly not my favorite brand of pencils to use. I have many sets of them that I've been getting and gathering since I was in my teens. but it does okay on the white pencil. The lines are lighter, just like they were for the others, and you can still kind of tell that it's a bird with feathers. The gouache looks terrible. You lose everything. It's impossible to get any detail work in there, and it just looks messy, which is a problem that I had with the leaves as well. I don't know how else to say this. I can't get this to even look like feathers down here, because it's all of the detail is gone. I think with at least Prismacolors on this paper, you need those details, you need those lines. I wouldn't try to get rid of them so far with either of these two methods. So next we have jelly roll and acrylic pen covering the white lines. But the only good thing I can say about the jelly roll is that you can kind of see the texture of the feathers where the pencil wouldn't cover the jelly roll. And that's in both cases. So covering a textured portion where you want some of that texture still there might be a good way to do it, especially if you want to have white kind of thing. The acrylic pen was terrible. I can't even hardly tell if these are birds, and I definitely would not recommend the acrylic pen with the Prismacolors for anything. So the next two sections are watercolor ground and antique white watercolor. And I gotta say, I don't hate either of these. I think that they both provided a little bit extra texture on this paper for the Prismacolors to interact with. I can still see detail of the crane underneath here, and I was able to really blend that quite smoothly there and here on the feathers of that crane. Now, on the antique white watercolor, similar sorts of results. I even was able to kind of cover the lines a little bit more than the bare paper. Now these pencils are very opaque, and so they kind of do a lot of the line covering for you as you're coloring on here. So that's not necessarily a feature of the stuff that I used on the paper, but it may be more of a feature of the actual pencil. And because I can build up more layers than normal, that means that I can have a little bit extra coverage when I'm covering those lines. I can still tell that these are feathers, especially on this bird here. Well, even on this one a little bit, I can see enough of the line space beneath there, and the shading of each individual feather stuck out. Now, of course, on the watercolor ground, you could see the lines completely through there, and here you can also see those lines, but it was that texturizing of the paper that allowed me to provide more layers of pencils and cover it up. So these are actually better performing for the Prismacolors than they have been for the Derwent or the Polychromos. And the last two are the gesso and the tempera paint stick. So again, the gesso allowed a lot of building up of layers, completely covered the lines, and I was able to do a lot more shading with the pencils. It is still difficult to get a nice sharp edge on them, and I did have to sharpen all of my pencils after doing things on here because it really dulled them down. But overall, the effect works out, and you can continue to add in details as you need. And it's probably, well, that looks pretty nice, but again, the edges are really difficult to get. So this looks pretty nice too. I'd say it's easier to use the Prismacolors than it was to use the Derwent drawing on here. For the tempera paint stick, again, you can't layer very much on here, especially because the soft Prismacolors really just coat the entire surface and everything slips off of it. I actually had put some shading in here in the feathers, and then when I colored over it with the cloud blue, it just disappeared. Like it just was lifted off of the paper with the light blue pencil, and that's just what happened there again. It just completely disappears. So not the best for that either. I've been working with pencils from most expensive to least expensive, and now I'm to budget pencils. And I only own Brute Square, Castle Art, just the regular Castle Art, and Starjoy Gold as far as other pencil types. So I think I will break up some of the rest of this into smaller bits so that I can try it out. So I have the stamens on the flowers. I have this portion here next to the cranes, and I have the center of the flower in the center left to do, which I do need to pull out my Jelly Roll, my acrylic pen, and my acrylic pen so I can do those there. I'll be very interested to see how these cheaper pencils work with each of these different ways of covering the white line. And I think then I will do the Brute Square up here on the flower, the Castle Art on this part, and the Starjoy Gold in the middle. So Brute Castle Art, Starjoy, and I will do each of the different sections with all three of those before I show again. So there'll be 4 more clips with each of those and then a follow-up. All right, all 3 of the areas have been done for the section of white pencil and gouache. For the Brute Funers, I used the number 32, which is a white, number 22, which is a brown, and number 3, which is a orangey yellow. And I did color these sections up here and then the flowers on the side. Up here, it didn't seem to really matter, just the same with all the others. Like the lines are, instead of being black, they're gray, and it does seem to make the colors overall brighter. On the gouache side, they worked really well, actually. The pencils are harder, and so I actually don't mind the way that looks there. Overall, with the gouache, I haven't really minded too much how things look. With the Castle Art pencils, I used number 112, which is cadmium green pale, and number 113, which is sap green. And then I used number 114, which is burnt sienna, and 117, which is walnut brown. And I did this area here by the cranes. And again, this just looks paler, like just not the same colors. The colors aren't quite as bright, and the lines are a little bit grayed out. I also colored this section here and down the middle with these Castle Art pencils. And like I said, these are just the regular Castle Arts, not like Castle Art Gold or anything like that. They are probably my least favorite pencils of what I own. Yeah, I'm going to say they're my least favorite. And so then over here on the gouache, they also operated the same way, although it seems a little bit harder to fill in all of the white with these. Yeah, I'm just not able to get in there. but that could be because it's a small area and it's really textured. It does have a hard time creating a sharp edge to anything that I color with it. It doesn't really, I can't really improve that any by putting more on there. So I don't particularly like how those work out. And then the last pencil that I have is the Starjoy Gold. I did color the center part here over the different white pencil and gouache in the center. The white pencil operated basically the same with all of the pencils. It did lighten the lines to a grayish color, but also had an effect on the color of the pencils. So you can see that these are just much more pastel colored in there. I've used colors 52, 53, and 54, which the Starjoy Gold work with like a tri-tone kind of set of pencils together. So 52, 53, 54, which are the colors razzleberry, garnet, and pink fuchsia. And then in the center of the flower, I used numbers 22 and 27, which are grasshopper and apple green, and I used the greens up here on here. So I don't particularly like how these pencils work on this paper, but I do like these pencils, and I did like how it worked over the gouache. So for using white pencil, overall I'd say the best performing pencils were probably the Prismacolors. I did these with the Prismacolors. Now I wouldn't want to do the entire set this way, and I may have used a Prismacolor white pencil, which may be partly why that worked so well. For the gouache, the Derwent seems to have worked really well on the gouache, and so did the Starjoy Gold. So I see being able to use gouache to white out a bunch of stuff and then using either the Starjoy Gold or the Derwent over the top of it. Now I'm going to color. I have filled in with the jelly roll the areas here where I had not done it. I'd missed it when I did this, got this set up years and years ago. And I also used a acrylic pen from Archer and Olive to do the acrylic pen section here. And I'm going to color those now, those 3 sections with the 3 different pencils and the paper plain without it, so we can do another comparison. I am so glad that these next 2 sections are over, the jelly roll and the acrylic pen. Basically, none of the 3 pencils stuck to the jelly roll very well. Let's start down here. The Starjoy Gold stuck to neither the acrylic pen or the jelly roll. The Castle Arts, again, you can see the white line entirely through here. Not as much on the acrylic pen as you can on the jelly roll. And then the Groove Squares did okay with both of them. They were able to color on those 2 surfaces, but I'm just really glad that those 2 are done. I would say the best with the jelly roll is the Prismacolor, but that could just be because that's what I like. It works well with the design, with the feathers of the cranes, and I mean, it worked okay up here as well on the acrylic pen. So for the acrylic pen, actually, coming back over here, the Derwent seems to have worked pretty good over the jelly roll as well. Not as well as I'd liked it to, but it did seem to do okay. So Prisma and Derwent for jelly roll. For the acrylic pen, I just don't like how any of them look. This didn't cover it at all, or very little with the polychromos. This just looks splotchy and weird. They all look pretty bad. So I can't even pick a good one because none of them looks really good for the acrylic pen. Time for the watercolor ground and antique white. The brute funer squares worked great on the watercolor ground, but I have nothing to complain about. They didn't cover the line, but not many of them did. The Castle Art pencils are in here. I could barely get them to color on that surface, so that wasn't great. And then the Starjoy Gold is down here, and I mean, they were okay. Overall, watercolor ground was just something I threw in at the last second. So I think the best on here is a tie between the Derwent and the Prismacolor. Although that's just information I think I would continue to use for on top of actual watercolors on watercolor ground instead of, using watercolor ground to cover the page. It made it very uneven. It has a weird texture to it. Kind of plasticky feeling. I don't like it. So, I mean, I have to still do some more work on trying out watercolor ground with actual watercolors, but I'd say, again, these two are the best. This is terrible, and I know that didn't go very well either. So, the next is the antique white watercolor. Now, I actually think this does a really good job of muting down the lines. We had the Brute Funer Square. I actually really like how it looks on there, and it did cover up the lines enough that even light yellow, or the yellowy orange color, was able to go over the line. And I think if I spent some more time on it, I could make that look really good. So Brute Funer Squares worked really well here. The Castle Art doesn't seem to want to put a lot of color down on there, so that was hard to work with. The Starjoy Gold did really well. I actually like how that looks, and so as far as which pencils I would want to use here, I think I would go with Brute Funer Squares. I don't know that I would even say Derwent Drawing here, but Brute Funer Squares and the Starjoy Gold. So with Antique Watercolor, I feel like it has done the maybe second best covering the lines, and I can use cheaper pencils on it. So this was really cheap watercolor, and these are the inexpensive pencils. So I think that's a good win for using this to cover up lines in coloring books. And there's only two left, thank goodness. I have made a decision through doing this that I am going to destash these Castle Art pencils. I don't like them even on regular paper, and I've been kind of like dreading doing that part in on the experiments here. I don't think I'm going to keep them. I don't want them in my collection if they're not going to be something that I'm going to use. So I will probably destash them, just this regular Castle Arts, and possibly the metallics. I really just don't have any interest in the metallics. And I'm going to keep the pastels that I have. I got them as a set of 3, like some sort of package deal. And so I don't really feel bad. If I'm not going to use them, I'd rather they go somewhere to somebody who would like to give them a try than to just toss them. So I'll probably give them away at a Fiber Guild meeting. So I'll be back with the last 2, and then I guess a final thoughts. Okay, this is it. I can actually hardly believe that this is it. So I'll get some of these little eraser crumbs out of here. The last two were the gesso and the tempera paint stick, the quick sticks. Okay, gesso. It worked well for covering the lines completely for the Brute Funer squares, the Castle Art, and the Starjoy Gold. In fact, I would say that this is probably the nicest I've ever seen the Starjoy Gold work, and I am a Starjoy Gold fan. I do think you need to keep things brushed off with this, and you may need to go in with your eraser if you have some white areas, such areas that you want to really keep white. All of the pencils worked on here. So this is the number one method for covering the lines by, getting started that way. You do want to do a thin layer so that you can still see the lines enough underneath it in order to color. The best pencils, I really couldn't say. Of the ones that I'm going to keep, the two worst were definitely the Prisma and the Polychromos. I didn't like either of them very well on this surface. Well, I don't know. The Prismas are okay. I can't remember now. I'll have to go back when I'm looking at this and see what I said. But everything did pretty well. I mean, I wouldn't be disappointed to use any of these on here again. I will say that it does create a very rough and scratchy surface. That makes it difficult to create that straight line on there, that like sharp line. And it's best to layer the darks first. That's what I found out in a couple of different places, is the dark is easier and the light colors go over it just fine to like blend it out. The tempera paint stick makes everything too slippery. It's really not a good surface to color on or layer over. The Polychromos did okay on it though, and the Prismas and the Brute Funer squares and Starjoy Gold also did pretty well on there. Castle Art sucked. Like I said, those are going to go. And then I wouldn't even waste my money and time using my nicer Derwent stuff if I'm using a tempera paint stick. So I've written a little bit of notes around the outside. Let's zoom this out so we can see the whole thing. Outside of what I just said, the white pencil is meh. I wouldn't use that method again. The gouache is my number 2 choice. So number 1 is the gesso, number 2 is gouache. Gouache is, as long as I get a nice smooth surface on it, I may be able to water it down a little bit more. All but the Polychromos I feel like worked pretty well on there, although with the Polychromos I was able to get the white veins on there, same as I was over here. But these are the same colored pencils and they look drastically different on the two different surfaces. So that's something that's also very interesting. The gesso it has a white color to it, but it enhances the color of everything and doesn't desaturate it, whereas this desaturated a little bit on these two, the Starjoy and this one, and it didn't seem to work that great. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't that great with the Prismacolors, but I was able to work things out. I probably would be able to continue to do that. The Jelly Roll was okay for the Derwent and only the Derwent. And if I were not going to color over anything, like if I really wanted it white, I might actually continue to use it. But I wasn't a fan of it. It did kind of leave a nice texture for the feathers when I was using the Prismacolors on the cranes. The acrylic pen, I just have written no. Watercolor ground is just not for pencils, I would say. And I did like, third, I would say, is probably the antique white watercolor, which was, a wild card. I just kind of threw it in there. But all of the pencils worked on it. Even the crappy Castle Arts kind of did okay on there. And it covered up the lines quite a bit. Like in here, the polychromos are, again, not the best on all of these. They're just not that kind of pencil. They're maybe much better for drawing than actually for coloring. That's what I would kind of say. But the other things look great. So the first place I give gesso, second place I give gouache, third place I give the antique white. Other methods that I would use, I would definitely use the tempera paint stick, and I have used this in coloring books with not white, but I wouldn't use it for white. I would use it with other colors, probably get a little bit better coverage, and then use pencils over the top to kind of highlight it. And then from there, white pencil was fine, but it doesn't have a huge effect. The last place is definitely the acrylic pen. So these two are probably tied. This one does give an effect. This one really didn't do much for it. So that is the finale of this. I will probably go back and finish. I was showing how to layer the pencils on there for that. I do like the polychromos. Just don't really want to use them with anything for covering up the lines in this way. I hope you enjoyed this video and give some of these techniques a shot. I'm really glad that I have this little experiment page, and I'm actually going to do it in a couple of different books, and continue using the now same 4 pencils or 5 pencils. I had the Derwents, I had the Polychromos, I had the Prismacolor, so I have Starjoy, and then Brute Funeral Square. So I have 5 different kinds of pencils that I will continue to use, and the Castle Arts are going to go bye-bye. So thanks for watching, and happy coloring.